What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, and we're going to be talking about the 12-team playoff. 1 month into the season, is it good for college football? Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words a little bit. Apple, Google, not Google, that's dead. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Google's not dead, just Google Podcasts is dead. Boy, this is an awful cold open, and I'm sorry, but we're just going to roll with it. It's fine. I want to start before we talk about the topic at hand to go back a bit. And I want to go back to about February or March of this past year, where I had said that I was going to be changing directions with the podcast because of certain things that came up. And so at that point, our family had some health issues. My wife had a bout with skin cancer, completely negative. It's been removed. We praise God for that. But that was kind of an event in life that made me rethink priorities, that made me rethink a lot of other things. And so at the time, I was like, I think I might do less with my podcast, do more with the Big Ten Huddle, with JR, maybe play around a bit with the College Huddle, which had just kind of been forming, which was very exciting. But I kind of went into autopilot mode. And as I did that, some very encouraging things happened. I was starting to do some State of the Union type episodes with different members of the College Huddle. And I think a number of people really gravitated towards those episodes. And I was really excited about that. And then we started to get into the season, got really excited. And I'm like, I'm just going to do what I've done the past few years, which is do a recap episode and do picks. That's what I'm going to do. Well, I started to realize, and I was actually talking with JR over at the Huddle, and I was realizing that I was essentially doing the same thing at two different shows. Just one, I was solo, and the other, I was with JR. And so I was like, well, do I keep doing it? People keep saying it, like things are good on the show and whatnot. And I started to realize that I think it would actually be better if I changed direction again during the season. So during the off season, I was doing the State of the Union stuff, and that was great. But I think this key question, why do the same thing at two different places? And then another obstacle, I shouldn't say obstacle, opportunity. I'll say opportunity has come up where I can now be part of a show on the Voice of College Football. And it would be solely an Ohio State show, Ohio State call-in show that I would do with JR. And because of that, Lord knows I don't have the time to do 5 episodes a week or however many. And so what I've decided to do, I'm sticking with this show, but once a week and talking about more broad topics, things that I am more just excited to talk about. So like next week, one of the listeners from 50613, Illinois guy, great listener, really appreciate your comments. But his suggestion was do a update review of my preseason picks and then update, at the halfway point, a midseason review. So we're going to do that next week. We're going to do a midseason review next week. And we'll do other things. There's a number of things on my radar that I want to talk about, right? Like Graham Harrell just getting fired. Other key coordinators that might be on the hot seat, coaches that are on the hot seat. I want to routinely check in on the Big Ten race for the Big Ten championship game. I want to talk about things like coaching trends, right? Like why is Curt Cignetti successful while Ryan Walters is struggling? Why is Luke Fickell struggling while other guys are like Brett Bielema is doing well at Illinois? I'd love to talk about those types of things in season. And of course, as we get closer to the Big Ten championship game, to the playoff, what it means in the grand scope of the national landscape. There's obviously always going to be NIL. There's always going to be further expansion, right? We're always talking about expansion. I want to talk about those things, and I think that those things are unique that I can talk about here that I won't necessarily talk about with JR in the Big Ten Huddle. And so here's what I want you to do. I still want you to like and subscribe this show, but if you want my picks, if you want my recaps, go over to the Big Ten Huddle, subscribe there, and then as more stuff comes out about the Ohio State show, make sure you follow me over there as well at the Voice of College Football. So that's kind of the thing. We're going to talk about more of the big picture, the broad landscape of college football, and particularly the Big Ten within college football on this show. We'll talk about more of the nitty gritty recap and picks on the other shows. And Sunday night and Tuesday night over the Big Ten Huddle. And we also do power rankings. That's the other thing. I give my power rankings, and we started doing power rankings episodes. So it's like I'm doing everything I'm doing here, I'm also doing on the Huddle. So you guys don't need to listen to two different shows to get the same content over and over again. So we're going to shift things up. Hopefully that serves you guys. It'll serve me. I'll have more time, I think, to devote more brain space to thinking about maybe the broader topics. So that being said, I want to dive in this episode to the 12-team playoff. And we're a month in to the playoff race. And there is just a lot of people starting to grumble. Here's why they're grumbling. They're mad because the regular season doesn't matter as much. They're mad because teams aren't eliminated in September, right? Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and they're not necessarily eliminated from the playoff discussion, right? Ole Miss just lost. Georgia just lost. And people are mad that they're not necessarily eliminated from the playoff discussion. And I get it, because the way the sport has worked for so long has been that if you lose, you're out, or you have no room for error. So like Georgia losing 41-34 to Alabama, it removed any room for error, and Georgia really didn't control its destiny anymore. Now, we can talk about how mid both those teams looked at times in this game, because I don't think Alabama, Georgia actually looked all that great. Now, I think Alabama looked great in the first half, but I thought they tried to give that game away. And I'm not the only one that thinks that, right? Doug Lamarice and Bill Landis, who talked about this game on Kings of the North. JR and I have talked about it. Everybody is going to talk about Alabama, Georgia being like one of the games of the century. It was kind of mid. Like Alabama tried to give that game away, and Georgia sucked for a half. Like it was not great football. It was a great game. It was not great football. It was good. It was entertaining. It wasn't great. That being said, Georgia has room for error, right? Because it's a 12-team playoff. They have room for error because if they beat Texas, they can get back into the SEC championship race. And so people are upset by that, and they're saying the regular season doesn't matter anymore. Saying the regular season doesn't matter. Saying the regular season doesn't matter because teams like Iowa isn't out yet, or teams like Michigan aren't out yet. We've eliminated the importance of the regular season, right? That's what people are saying. They're saying that. They're saying the stakes of every game is reduced. They're wrong. And if you think that, I'm just telling you right now, you're wrong. I'll prove it to you as well. So everybody was saying how Alabama, Georgia didn't seem to have the same hype as it has had over the years. For one, most of the time, Alabama and Georgia has not faced off in the regular season. It's mostly been a West versus East SEC championship game. So yeah, the SEC title wasn't on the line in this game. Okay. Yeah, that's going to eliminate some stakes. Okay. Also, you realize that It was the most watched regular season prime time game since 2017 when Alabama and Florida State played on the opening weekend of the 2017 season. 12 million viewers tuned in to watch Alabama, Georgia in a game that apparently didn't matter. So don't tell the fans that that game didn't matter because it mattered. And it had all sorts of stakes, right? As much as we love Kirby Smart, two-time national championship, a champion coach. But you know what? He still hasn't gotten rid of the Alabama albatross, which he's 1-6. Kalen DeBoer, there was a lot of how is he going to do replacing Nick Saban? This game, believe it or not, had a lot of stakes in advancing narratives, which is a lot of what college football is. For people who are going to say that Ohio State, Oregon isn't going to matter in 2 weeks because they're probably going to meet in the Big Ten championship game. Do you know what the stakes are for Ryan Day and Dan Lanning in that game? Because Dan Lanning, as much, and I like Dan Lanning. I'm not trying to say anything negative about Dan Lanning, but the reality is he has lost every time to Washington, his rival. He has lost a lot of big games, despite the fact being a hot young coach. What happens if he loses to Ohio State in 2 weeks? What's the narrative going to be? If Ryan Day goes to Autzen with this 13 million or 20 million or 100 bajillion dollar roster and loses to Oregon, what's the narrative going to be around Ryan Day? You're going to tell me that game doesn't matter for legacy? It doesn't matter for playoff positioning? It doesn't matter for the playoff committee? Of course it matters. And I guarantee you, Oregon, Ohio State is going to do crazy numbers. I would not be surprised if it beats Alabama, Georgia, because it's going to have the whole country watching. And by the way, that weekend is going to be redonkulous in terms of games. I'm having a party at my house for USC, Penn State, and then Ohio State, Oregon. It's going to be awesome. I cannot wait. It's going to be maybe the best weekend in college football in the Big Ten in years. It's going to be awesome. I will probably now that I'm talking about it, I'll probably do a show on that because it's going to be the best weekend in recent Big Ten history for big marquee matchups that involve top tier premier teams. It's going to be phenomenal. The entire world, college football world, will be paying attention to the Big Ten from 3:30 to 11 o'clock. And there are other good games that week as well. It's going, just look at the schedule again. You have Washington, Iowa. Great game. It's going to be a great game. You have Illinois, Purdue's not going to be good. Wisconsin, Rutgers could be a good game. It's going to be a great, great showcase. And it's a showcase without Michigan or Michigan State on the slate. Nebraska's off that weekend. Indiana's off that weekend. And it's still going to be ridiculous. It's going to be awesome. So get out of here with this. It reduces the stakes. I don't want to hear it. It's a lazy take. And here's the beautiful thing about it. Everybody's saying, well, but Notre Dame's not eliminated because they lost to Northern Illinois. You know what? Good. I've hated for years that if you lose the second week of the season, that you might not get in the playoff. How dumb is that for a sport? You know who just lost? The Houston Texans. And nobody's saying that, CJ stinks and they're going to miss the playoff. No. They lost a game to a really good defense, by the way, in Minnesota. And it was okay, that was one game. Let's see how they progress in the season. You know what I love about this? You get to see teams progress. So as much as I don't want to see Georgia win another national championship, you know what? We get to see if they can get through the gauntlet that is their schedule. Notre Dame, you shouldn't have lost to Northern Illinois. But you know what? Let's see how Marcus Freeman does at developing his team. Michigan, USC, like those teams each have a loss. But like, are we going to really punish Michigan for losing to the number one team in the country? Like, really? We're gonna punish them the second week for losing that game in the second week of the season? Like, what if they lose to Washington? Are we gonna punish them because they still have a young roster? Like, that has been the dumbest thing about the 14 playoff era and the BCS era. And everybody's saying, well, everybody gets to go to a bowl game. Okay, no offense. Who gives a rip? Like, and before you say, well, bowl games get good ratings, yes. And teams did love to be there. It was a fun thing for teams, for sure. Ask anybody whether they want to be in a playoff for a national championship where they can earn their way in, or would you prefer to be in a bowl game in New York City in the frigid cold where you get a nice pinstripe bowl trophy and then you just go home? Like, yes, it's a great accolade. Like Rutgers, I'm sure loved being in the game. Imagine they go 10-2 and sneak into the playoff. Doesn't matter if they get beat in the playoff. They can say for all time, we were in the playoffs. You think that doesn't appeal to recruits or NIL or all that stuff right now that's ruling the college football world? I mean, get out of here with this. It is the best, I hate NIL. I hate the way it's gone. I don't despise NIL for what it's trying to do. I despise what it is right now. And that needs to get fixed. And again, that's another episode for another time. But the 12-team playoff is easily the best thing that has happened to college football, maybe ever. And I don't think that's hyperbole. And I know there's going to be a lot of pushback. I know there's going to be a lot of pushback because people love tradition and people think different teams don't deserve to be in. Here's the reality. It's making the regular season better. You want to know why? I'm intrigued by Boise State and UNLV. Which one of them is going to get the group of 5 bid? That's freaking awesome. And you know what? You know what game actually matters right now? Boise State, Oregon. That's a game that matters for the playoff race in multiple facets. Because for Oregon, it's a data point on their resume. For Boise State, it's evidence that they can hang with the big boys. So put them in the dang playoff. UNLV, they beat Kansas. Kansas is not very good this year. But you know what? We're paying attention. Every game matters now. Every game matters. And the reality is every game doesn't sink your season, but every game is a resume point that matters in the context of this race. It's beautiful. And you want to know why it's beautiful, particularly for the Big Ten? Because we're 1 month into the season, and a lot of teams still have at least an outside shot to get in. Now, I want to clarify what I mean by that. What I'm not saying is there are a lot of realistic shots to get in. But here's the beautiful thing about this playoff. There's a lot of teams that are not fully eliminated yet. So I was looking at, my handy dandy paper sheet right here that if you're on YouTube, you can see it blurred out because I have the virtual background on. Here are the teams that legitimately are not eliminated. Illinois, they have 1 loss at Penn State by 2 scores. They run the table. You think they're not in the playoff? They'd have wins over Michigan, at Oregon, Michigan State, at Rutgers. Like, even if they lose one of those at 10-2, they have an outside shot sneaking in. Like, Illinois is a dark horse. Indiana, like, of course. Of course they do, right? They could be 6-0 after this week. They get Northwestern. They should be 6-0 after this week. And then they play Nebraska, Washington, at Michigan State, Michigan, at Ohio State, and Purdue. Like, if they lose to Michigan and Ohio State 10-2, they are a dark horse. If they win every game except Ohio State, they're in. Like, no buts about it. They're in. Iowa, they're not eliminated. They got a tough one against Ohio State, but they run the table after that 10-2. And if they lose close to Ohio State and have a 1-point loss to Iowa State, who right now looks like a contender in the Big 12, they're not out. Maryland, they're out. They're out. You could make they're 3-2. They're out. I don't see a pathway for them. Okay, Michigan, they're still in, right? And they've got a brutal schedule, but if Orji learns how to throw, like, they can get in at 10-2. They might even be able to get in at 9-3 with their schedule. Michigan, I think 9-3 would be hard for them, by the way, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Michigan State, they're probably out, but they can determine the race. That's fun. I think they're going to upset a couple people along the way over the next few weeks. They get Oregon Friday night. Watch out. Watch out. I did not, on the huddle, I did not pick an upset, but I said watch out. JR picked an upset. And, we got a lot of Oregon fans who were upset about that. I'm just telling you, Oregon, you can appease yourselves all you want by saying, well, we haven't shown anything yet. We're just waiting for Ohio State, yada, yada, yada. You should have lost to Boise. And you got to understand, Michigan State's not a pushover. This will be either the best or the second best team you have played. Like, it's no joke. And you have not looked great. Now, if you're being vanilla, okay, fine. But if you're being vanilla, why were you being vanilla when you were about to lose and you needed some special teams magic to make sure you didn't lose to the Broncos? I mean, my gosh, what dumb logic. Sorry, I'm not trying to be glib. I understand Oregon fans are excited about their team, but like, as an Ohio State fan, I get it. Like, whenever Ohio State struggles against an inferior team, well, we were just being vanilla. No, typically it showcases weaknesses. Like, yes, you're saving some things. Also, if you're saving some things, you still better be dominating inferior opposition. Which, yes, Oregon has played better opposition than Ohio State, not by much. Not by much. Okay. So watch out, Michigan State. They're probably not they're certainly not in the national championship race. Probably not going to be the Big Ten race, but they're going to play spoiler. I would bet it. Maybe not against Oregon this week. I don't think they're going to beat Oregon this week, but watch out. Just watch out. Minnesota, again, spoiler. Like, they got USC this week. And while I think they have disappointed me, I still think they have pieces to give teams problems. Right? Nebraska is still in it. They got a big one against Rutgers. I'm picking Rutgers in that game, but Nebraska is still in it. They beat Rutgers this weekend. They go to Indiana, they go to Ohio State, and they go to USC. And they go to Iowa. What a brutal stretch of away games. But if they win all but one, they're in. And they're not so, it's not so insurmountable for them. It's not out of the realm of possibility to go 10-2. I don't think it'll happen, but again, they're in it. It's a possibility. Ohio State, obviously. I skipped Northwestern. We can all figure out why. No offense. Oregon, absolutely. Penn State, absolutely. We're not going to talk about the abomination that is the Boilermakers right now. I'm sorry. I am disappointed. I really thought there was going to be more to your season this year, and I'm sad, but no. Rutgers, yes, yes, big one against Nebraska this week, and again they beat Nebraska. They're 6-0, and they have two big road wins, and then they get Wisconsin. I think they can beat them. They get UCLA. I think they can beat them at USC. It's dicey, but it's not. It again, not out of the realm of possibility. It's certainly hard to do a Friday night road game at USC. That's gonna be discombobulating for their body clocks for sure. So that'll be a tough matchup. I think that might be really rough. But then Minnesota at Maryland, Illinois at Michigan State, they could go 11-1 or 10-2. Again, by no means am I saying that it will happen. I'm just saying it's still a possibility. It's a real possibility. UCLA, no. USC, yeah, one loss, and they beat Penn State, and they beat Washington, and they beat Nebraska. Even if they lose to Notre Dame at the end of the season, they got a shot. Washington, yeah, they've lost two, but they win out. They're in. Right? They beat Michigan, at Iowa, at Indiana, USC, at Penn State, at Oregon. That's again, brutal schedule. But there's no team on there where I'm like, well, Washington has no shot. They've got the players. They just need to be disciplined and be better coached. But those things can happen. And then Wisconsin, I don't think they're in it. So just looking at the schedule and looking at after the first month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 out of 18 teams in the Big Ten are realistically still in the playoff conversation. Now, by realistically, I don't mean that it's likely. What I'm saying is they are realistically not eliminated. Like if we ended the season now, or if we just projected and the best case scenario happened for each team, they have a shot. I'm sorry. That's awesome. So for all you purists out there who are saying, oh my gosh, like we just want the best of the best of the best. That's not how sports works, where we have a glorified beauty contest to see who the best four teams are, just so that we can say we were right or we were wrong. That's not how this works. What sports is about is, do you win the games and do you play your way in? And for the longest time, college football was legitimately the only sport that didn't work like that. And now all of a sudden, teams can start the year, every single one of them, and say, hey, we got a shot. It might be a 0.01% shot, but it's a shot, and we'll take it. And I know that there are other things. There are other things at play, like, you are still being selected by a committee. I think that's stupid. But the reality is the way that conferences are set up, you need to do it that way right now. I get that. I think if you went to just all automatic bids right now, with the way the system is set up, then it's dumb. Right. And I'll talk maybe at the end about the whole, should the Big Ten and SEC have 4 guaranteed bids each? Spoiler alert, I don't. I think it's dumb. But we'll talk about that in a minute. I just think it gives more access, and you can say what you want about, well, but then the playoffs are going to suck. Maybe. How many playoff games in the 4-team era sucked? How many games in the BCS championship game era sucked? Like, that's not a good reason. Like, Sorry, it's not. Like, honestly, who gives a rip how good the games are in the playoff era or in the playoffs? That's not the point. The point of playoffs are not to deliver the best television product. The point of the playoffs is to reward teams that deserve to be there. That's the key. And we've lost that along the way, right? Just because a team looks like the best team for a few weeks in the NFL doesn't mean you put them in the playoffs because they lose a bunch of, or because they look great. They got to prove it. They got to earn it on the field. Each team has a chance to earn it on the field. And before people say, well, but there's major schedule disparity. Yes. Point taken. It's a flaw in the system. And I fully acknowledge that. I'd still rather have this than the alternative. Because you know what? The schedules over time, in my opinion, will become more equated, particularly in the Big Ten and the SEC. I don't know about the ACC and the Big 12. I think, again, I still think we're going to super conferences. I think we are at super conferences, and I just think we're kind of just waiting to see what happens, see the fallout of that. But the reality is, as this happens over time, and I think as long as NIL gets regulated, that's a big if. I think it will. I don't think we can live in a world where it just stays unchecked like this. And I mean, I think the fact that players are opting out, Donovan McCulley is redshirting to transfer. There's going to be changes down the pike. There has to be to regulate this. Which again, NCAA ineptitude. Good job. But the beauty of this, of the playoff expansion era, is that with more teams that are relevant to the national stage comes more exposure for more players at more programs, which means you can be Kyle Monangai at Rutgers and get a ton of press and be at Rutgers. You can be a Max Brosmer at Minnesota, and if you have a good year, you're getting NIL deals, and they can be national in scope, right? Miller Moss at USC. Now, USC is a premier program, right? But like, if Iowa finally gets a quarterback that hits, or Maryland, if say Billy Edwards goes on a tear, or say if the Tagovailoas have another brother, right? And they start to do well and they're in the national picture. Aiden Childs at Michigan State, even though their team has no shot to get back in the playoff race, he has a couple of really good games. You don't think that an NIL, NIL deals are just going to pop out of the woodwork, and people will be able to look at Michigan State and say, oh, I can get NIL there. I can compete there. I have nationally televised games there. It's more access to more teams. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I know there's a lot of ugly things about it that come with it, right? With NIL, with the transfer portal, those things need to get regulated. They need to get fixed. So by no means am I looking at college football and saying it's better, like it's all the way better. No, we need to change a lot of things, and we'll talk about that as things go on. But here's my overall point to those who are decrying that teams aren't eliminated after one loss. Like, no offense, like, what is your life? Like, why are we actively rooting for teams? That's probably that's harsh. I'm sorry. I should have said it that way. But like, honestly, like, why are we rooting for teams to be out? Like, I don't think that makes it all that much better. I think it makes it more exciting because you know what? A team can lose and gather itself, right? Like 2014 Ohio State, I'll always go back to them. Everybody knew that they weren't good enough. And they own, if not for a 59-0 blistering of Wisconsin, they don't get in the playoff. Okay, I mean, could you imagine 2014 Ohio State not in the playoff? And that story, that narrative. And it almost happened because we only had a 14 playoff. If we had a 12-team playoff then, you know what happens? Like Ohio State's in and TCU and Baylor, which I think all those teams were deserving that year. Now we don't have to make that choice. Now we're picking between the 11th and 12th best team, which quite honestly, if we're picking between Indiana and Ole Miss, I'm ripping off of Cover 3 podcast right now. I readily admit that. But if we're deciding between Ole Miss and Indiana, like if we leave one of them out, it's sad. I don't lose as much sleep over it. But also it's like, man, Indiana's in the conversation. And compared to other teams that I mentioned, Indiana's legitimately in the conversation. Indiana might be the third or fourth toughest test for Ohio State this season. It's insane. They're good, by the way. They're very good. If you haven't seen it, I posted a video about Curtis Rourke. Dude's legit. Dude's legit. My gosh, he's legit. Oh my gosh. They're so good. I love me the Hoosiers this year. They're so good. So let me kind of dial back for a minute. I will say that as exciting as this is, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. What I would love, honestly, what I would love, as much as I love that the Big Ten is 18 teams and has Oregon and Washington, I'd love to go back in some ways to the way conferences were. Like, have 8 different conferences. Maybe you do some finagling with the Mountain West and the MAC and whatnot, but get to 8 conferences, something like that. Bring back the Big East, bring back the Pac-10, and then you have an automatic bid from each league, and then have some other qualifier, that there's automatic bids, and that you're taking all the guesswork out of it. It's you have the bids. That would be my ideal. I don't think that's going to happen as long as conferences are involved, because it's become all about money. And so we're always going to have a little bit of subjectivity, and that sucks. I don't like subjectivity when it comes to the playoffs. I don't. And I think you guys know, if you've listened to me for a while, I've been consistently on that bandwagon that subjectivity and rankings to determine a champion is dumb. But this is the best. This is the best of what we've ever had. So, do I think it's perfect? No. Do I think wholesale changes need to happen in college football to actually maintain and sustain the sport? Absolutely. But can we just acknowledge that 1 month into the season, the 12-team playoff is exceedingly great for college football? And I can tell you that that's true even without seeing a single playoff game, because it doesn't matter how the playoff games play out. What matters is that there's a ton of teams that still have access. And most of the teams in the Big Ten, you guys are going to have a say in the playoff one way or another. And that hasn't happened where every team or most teams have mattered, maybe ever. And it's a beautiful thing. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe. Follow me here. Follow me on X, Instagram. Send me emails, big10footballtalk@gmail.com. If you guys have left comments, I've seen them. I appreciate them. I haven't done shows like this in a while where I've been able to really respond to listeners and viewers. I'm going to try to do more of that in these episodes now that I'm doing more of the picks over at the Huddle. But make sure you like, follow, subscribe. and subscribe over to the Big Ten Huddle. The schedule, just so you know, my schedule: Sundays and Tuesdays, we'll do Sunday nights. We'll do recaps. Tuesday nights we'll do picks on the Big Ten Huddle. Monday nights, starting the 13th, I believe, of October, it'll be an Ohio State call-in show. So if you have questions about the Buckeyes, make sure to hit us up there. When I have information about that, I'll let you know. And once in a while, I'll be on the Saturday night power ranking show. If it's not super late, if there's a Big Ten After Dark game, I ain't staying up for power rankings, but still check it out. Those have been fun shows. JR and then Kent from Casual Big Ten have been rocking it over there. They're doing great work. And I love it when I can join them. And then Thursday mornings, I will release episodes like I have been, but talking big picture of college football. Sometimes I'll have guests, sometimes I won't. Really depends on schedule and whatnot, but it is fun. It is fun, and I love this. So thank you guys. Love you all. Take care. God bless.